You ever find yourself in a heated conversation with someone, feeling that familiar rush of defensiveness rising in your chest, your heart pounding, words ready to fire back, and then something strange happens. You pause. You take a breath. You actually listen to what they're saying instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. And in that moment, you realize you just did something your younger self could never do. That split second of self-awareness, that ability to step outside your own emotional reaction, that's not just maturity. That's your mind outgrowing the emotional patterns that have controlled you since childhood. It's a fundamental shift in how your brain processes the world, how you relate to your own feelings, and how you show up in your life. But here's what most people don't realize. This transformation isn't random, and it isn't just about getting older. Abraham Maslow, the brilliant psychologist who spent decades studying human potential, discovered something profound about emotional development that changes everything we thought we knew about growing up. He found that emotional childhood isn't defined by your age. It's defined by which level of needs is controlling your behavior, which fears are driving your decisions, and whether you're living from a place of deficiency or growth. Most people walk around at 30, 40, even 50 years old still operating from the emotional reflexes of a frightened child, and they have no idea why their relationships keep failing, why they feel perpetually anxious, why that sense of emptiness never quite goes away no matter what they achieve. The weight of this realization hits differently when you understand what's actually happening in your psyche. You're not broken. You're not damaged beyond repair. You're simply stuck in developmental patterns that served you once but now suffocate the person you're trying to become. You keep seeking validation from others because deep down you never learned to validate yourself. You keep avoiding conflict because somewhere in your past, conflict meant abandonment or punishment. You keep achieving and acquiring and performing because you're trying to fill a hole that achievements can't fill. And the exhaustion of it all, the constant performance, the endless anxiety, the feeling that you're never quite enough, it wears you down in ways you can barely articulate to the people who ask if you're okay. You smile and say you're fine, but inside you know something fundamental needs to change. You know you can't keep living like this, reacting like this, hurting like this. The relationships you damage with your defensiveness, the opportunities you miss because fear whispers you're not ready, the authentic version of yourself that stays hidden because being real feels too dangerous, too vulnerable, too much. This is the cost of emotional childhood extending into your adult years, and it's a price you pay every single day in moments of connection you can't quite access, in peace you can't quite feel, in a life that's somehow happening to you instead of being created by you. But what if I told you that Maslow identified specific, recognizable signs that your mind has finally made that leap? What if there were actual markers, psychological shifts you could identify in yourself that prove you're no longer operating from that place of childhood deficiency? Today, I'm going to walk you through the 5 unmistakable signs that your mind has outgrown its emotional childhood, based on Maslow's groundbreaking research into self-actualization and human development. These aren't just theoretical concepts. These are real, observable changes that happened to the people Maslow studied, the individuals he called self-actualizing, people who had moved beyond the compulsive need for safety and approval and stepped into something entirely different. By the end of this, you'll know exactly where you stand in your own emotional development. You'll understand why certain patterns keep showing up in your life, and most importantly, you'll have a roadmap for what real psychological growth actually looks like. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending you're fine when you're not. This is about fundamental transformation in how your mind processes reality, and it starts with understanding the first sign. In 1943, while World War II raged across the globe and most of psychology focused on pathology and mental illness, Abraham Maslow was conducting research that would completely revolutionize our understanding of human development. He wasn't studying broken people trying to figure out what was wrong with them. He was studying the healthiest, most psychologically mature individuals he could find, asking a question nobody else was asking at the time. What does optimal human functioning actually look like? Among his subjects were Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, and several of his own colleagues and students who demonstrated what he called self-actualizing characteristics. What he discovered in these individuals shocked him, and it flew in the face of Freudian psychology that dominated the field. These psychologically mature people weren't just managing their neuroses better. They had fundamentally different relationship with reality itself, with their own emotions, with other people, with their sense of purpose. And one of the most striking patterns he noticed was this. They had completely outgrown the emotional reflexes that most adults still carried from childhood. The first sign Maslow identified, and perhaps the most foundational, is what he called autonomy. But it's not what most people think. It's not about being independent or not needing anyone. It's something far more subtle and far more powerful. It's the ability to have your emotional stability come from within, rather than from external validation, approval, or circumstances. Let me tell you about one of the individuals Maslow studied closely in the 1940s. She was a woman in her mid-50s, a social activist who had experienced tremendous criticism and opposition throughout her career. What fascinated Maslow wasn't that she didn't care what people thought. She did care. She listened to feedback. She considered criticism thoughtfully. But her fundamental sense of worth, her inner stability, didn't rise and fall with whether people approved of her or not. When she was attacked in the press, which happened frequently, she would read the criticism, assess if there was anything valid she could learn from it, and then move forward with her work without the emotional devastation that most people would experience. This wasn't suppression. She wasn't pretending it didn't hurt. She had simply developed an inner source of validation that was stronger than the external noise. Now compare that to emotional childhood, which Maslow observed in most adults. In emotional childhood, your mood, your sense of self, your entire emotional state is hostage to external circumstances. Someone criticizes you, and your whole day is ruined. Someone praises you, and you feel temporarily worth something. Your partner seems distant, and suddenly you're questioning everything about yourself. Your boss doesn't acknowledge your work, and you spiral into feelings of inadequacy. This is what Maslow called deficiency motivation. You're operating from a deficit, constantly seeking from the outside world what you haven't developed inside yourself. Your emotional childhood keeps you in a perpetual state of need, and that need makes you controllable, manipulable, desperate. You make decisions based not on what's right for you, but on what will get you approval, what will keep people from leaving, what will maintain your fragile sense of safety. And here's the devastating part. You can achieve tremendous external success while still operating from this place. You can have the career, the relationship, the house, the accomplishments, and still feel that gnawing emptiness because you never developed that internal source of worth. The shift happens, Maslow observed, when you begin to validate your own experience. Not in an arrogant way, not by dismissing feedback or refusing to grow, but by developing what he called an inner compass. You start to know what feels right for you, what aligns with your values, what matters in your life. And that knowing becomes more authoritative than other people's opinions. You can receive criticism without crumbling, because criticism is information, not a verdict on your worth as a human being. You can receive praise without becoming addicted to it, because praise is nice, but it's not the oxygen you need to survive. This is autonomy in the Maslowian sense. Your emotional stability has a foundation that can't be shaken by every wind that blows through your life. And when Maslow studied people who had developed this capacity, he found they reported feeling simultaneously more connected to others and more free. The paradox resolved itself beautifully. When you stop needing people to validate you, you can actually love them more fully, more generously, without the hidden agenda of getting something back. The second sign builds directly on the first, and Maslow called it reality perception. In emotional childhood, your perception of reality is distorted by your needs and fears. You don't see people as they actually are. You see them through the filter of what you need them to be, what you're afraid they might be, what they represent to you based on your past. Your perception is need-determined, fear-determined, wound-determined. Maslow discovered this when he analyzed how self-actualizing people differed in their ability to perceive others accurately. One of his case studies involved a professor who had an unusual talent for understanding students and colleagues. Other faculty members would complain about a difficult student, describing them as lazy or hostile. But this professor would spend time with the same student and see something entirely different. He would perceive the fear underneath the hostility, the history of failure underneath the apparent laziness. It wasn't that he was more compassionate, though he was. It was that his perception wasn't clouded by his own ego needs, his own defensiveness, his own projections. In emotional childhood, you project constantly. Your critical parent becomes every authority figure. Your abandoning ex becomes every new partner. Your childhood feelings of inadequacy get projected onto neutral situations, turning them into threats. Someone doesn't text you back immediately, and you don't think maybe they're busy. You think they're rejecting you, they're losing interest, you did something wrong. That's not reality perception. That's your wounded inner child interpreting ambiguous data through the lens of past pain. Someone at work gets promoted and you don't think good for them or wonder what skills they developed. You think you're not good enough? You'll never succeed. The system is rigged against you. Again, reality is being filtered through childhood feelings of inadequacy or unfairness. The exhausting part is, you don't even realize you're doing it. You think you're seeing reality clearly. You think your interpretations are accurate. But you're living in a funhouse mirror version of reality, distorted by unprocessed emotions and unmet childhood needs. The transformation Maslow observed in psychologically mature individuals was remarkable. They developed what he called an ability to perceive reality more accurately, to see people and situations with less projection, less distortion, less need for things to be a certain way. They could sit with ambiguity. They could see someone's behavior without immediately making it mean something about themselves. They could observe their own emotional reactions without confusing those reactions with objective truth about the situation. One of the individuals Maslow studied described it as learning to distinguish between the map and the territory. Your emotions are the map, your interpretations are the map, but reality is the territory. In emotional childhood, you confuse the two constantly. In emotional maturity, you develop the capacity to check your map against the territory, to question your interpretations, to recognize when you're projecting old pain onto new situations. This doesn't mean you become cold or analytical. Maslow was very clear about this. Self-actualizing people were often more emotional, more deeply feeling than others, not less. But they had developed a relationship with their emotions that was different. They could feel intensely and still maintain perspective. They could be hurt by something and still recognize that their hurt didn't necessarily mean the other person intended harm. They could be angry and still be curious about what triggered that anger, what old wound got activated. This capacity for what Maslow called detachment wasn't emotional disconnection. It was the ability to observe your own psychological processes while experiencing them, to have one part of you feel while another part notices your feeling. And this capacity changes everything about how you move through the world. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I see people struggling with constantly. You might be recognizing yourself in some of what I'm describing. You might be realizing that yes, you still seek validation in ways that exhaust you. Yes, you still project your past onto your present in ways that damage your relationships. And maybe you're feeling that familiar feeling rising up, that feeling of, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not good enough, I'm broken, I'll never get there. Notice that feeling. Notice how quickly your mind jumped to self-judgment. Because that's the voice of emotional childhood right there, and it's so automatic you might not even realize it's happening. If any of this is resonating with you, if you're starting to see patterns in yourself that you've been carrying from childhood into your adult life, do me a favor. Leave a comment right now and just write, I'm ready to see clearly. That's it, just that simple phrase, I'm ready to see clearly. Because here's what I've learned after studying Maslow's work for years and working with thousands of people on their growth journey. The moment you acknowledge a pattern is the moment you begin to have power over it. You're not alone in this. Hundreds of people watching this right now are having the same realization, seeing the same patterns, feeling the same mix of recognition and discomfort. And your comment, your simple acknowledgement, it might be exactly what someone else needs to see today to feel less alone, to find the courage to look at their own patterns. You have more healing power than you realize. So go ahead, pause for just a second, leave that comment. I'm ready to see clearly, and let's continue this journey together. The third sign Maslow identified is what he called spontaneity. But again, it's not what people usually assume. It's not about being impulsive or doing whatever you feel like in the moment. It's about the ability to express yourself authentically without the constant self-censoring, self-monitoring, and performance that characterizes emotional childhood. Maslow observed that psychologically mature individuals had a naturalness to them, a lack of artificiality, an ability to be themselves without the exhausting calculation that most people engage in constantly. One of his research subjects was a physician who worked in a hospital setting that was highly political and status-conscious. His colleagues spent enormous energy managing their image, saying the right things to the right people, presenting carefully curated versions of themselves. But this physician, while respectful and professional, simply showed up as himself. He said what he actually thought in meetings. He admitted when he didn't know something. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or maintain a particular image. And what fascinated Maslow was that this authenticity didn't hurt his relationships or his career. In fact, people trusted him more, sought his opinion more, felt more comfortable around him precisely because he wasn't performing. In emotional childhood, you're performing constantly, and it's absolutely exhausting even if you don't consciously realize you're doing it. You walk into a room and immediately start calculating, who do I need to be here? What version of myself will be accepted? What parts of me do I need to hide? You're in a conversation, and there's a split-second delay before you respond because you're not saying what you actually think or feel. You're saying what you think the other person wants to hear, what will make them like you, what will keep you safe. You have opinions you don't express because what if people disagree? What if they judge you? What if you're wrong and look stupid? You have feelings you don't share because vulnerability feels dangerous, because people have used your openness against you before, because showing how you really feel might push people away. So you perform. You present the acceptable version of yourself. You edit in real time. And underneath it all is a deep, painful fear. If people saw who I really am, they wouldn't want me. If I stopped performing, I'd be rejected. The real me isn't enough, isn't lovable, isn't acceptable. The tragedy, Maslow observed, is that this constant performance prevents genuine connection. People might like the version of you that you're presenting, but they don't actually know you. And you feel lonely even when you're surrounded by people because nobody is connecting with your authentic self. You're getting validation for a performance, which means the validation doesn't actually touch the part of you that needs it. It's like being hungry and watching other people eat. The approval you get while hiding yourself can't nourish you because it's not approval of you. It's approval of your carefully constructed mask. And the exhaustion of maintaining that mask, the constant vigilance required to never slip up and reveal something unacceptable, it's a weight you carry every single day without even naming it. The shift into spontaneity, as Maslow described it, isn't about suddenly oversharing or dumping your unfiltered thoughts on everyone. It's about developing enough inner security that you can risk being real. You start saying what you actually think, and yes, sometimes people disagree, but you discover that disagreement isn't death. You start expressing feelings as they arise, and yes, sometimes it's awkward, but you discover that authenticity creates deeper connection than performance ever could. You start showing parts of yourself you previously hid, and you discover something revolutionary. The people who matter don't abandon you. In fact, your realness gives them permission to be real too, and suddenly your relationships have a depth they never had before. This doesn't happen overnight. Maslow was clear that this kind of spontaneity develops gradually as you build evidence that being yourself is safe, that the catastrophe you've been afraid of doesn't actually happen when you stop performing. The fourth sign is what Maslow called problem centering rather than ego centering, and this might be the most subtle but most powerful shift of all. In emotional childhood, you are the center of your universe. Not because you're selfish or narcissistic, but because your unmet needs are so loud, so demanding, that everything gets filtered through the question, what does this mean for me? How does this affect me? What do I need to do to stay safe and get my needs met? Every interaction, every situation, every challenge gets processed through this ego-centered lens. Someone is upset, and your immediate thought isn't genuine curiosity about what they're experiencing. It's anxiety about whether you did something wrong, whether they're mad at you, whether this threatens your security. A problem arises at work, and your first reaction isn't creative problem solving. It's worry about how this reflects on you, whether you'll be blamed, whether this puts your position at risk. Maslow observed something fascinating in self-actualizing individuals. They had somehow made a shift from being primarily concerned with themselves to being concerned with problems, causes, missions outside themselves. This wasn't self-sacrifice or people-pleasing. They hadn't abandoned their own needs. They had simply satisfied enough of their basic needs for safety and esteem that their attention could turn outward. One of the individuals he studied extensively was a woman involved in social justice work. What struck him wasn't just her dedication to the cause, but how she thought about challenges. When faced with obstacles, her focus wasn't on how this made her look or feel. It was on the problem itself. What's actually happening here? What's the root cause? What needs to happen to address this? What's my role in the solution? Her ego wasn't absent, but it wasn't running the show. She could receive criticism of her strategies without it becoming criticism of her worth. She could acknowledge mistakes without it triggering shame spirals. She could collaborate without needing to prove she was the smartest person in the room. Her attention had shifted from protecting and promoting herself to genuinely engaging with meaningful work. The contrast with emotional childhood is stark. When you're operating from ego-centering, you can't fully engage with anything because you're too busy monitoring yourself, protecting yourself, promoting yourself. You're in a conversation, but you're not really listening because you're thinking about what you're going to say next, how you're coming across, whether you sound intelligent. You're working on a project, but you're not fully present to the work itself because you're worried about whether it'll be good enough, whether people will be impressed, what failure would mean about you. You're in a relationship, but you can't fully open to the other person because you're too busy managing their perception of you, protecting yourself from potential rejection, calculating what you need to do to keep them happy. Everything becomes about you. Not because you're choosing it, but because your psychology hasn't developed beyond that stage. It's like being stuck in the developmental stage of a toddler who genuinely can't understand that other people have separate internal experiences because their own needs are so overwhelming. The transformation happens, Maslow found, when you've done enough healing and growth that your basic psychological needs are reasonably met. When you have enough inner security, enough self-acceptance, enough capacity to regulate your own emotions, suddenly you have attention and energy available for something beyond yourself. You can get genuinely interested in problems, in ideas, in causes, in other people's experiences without everything being a referendum on your worth. You can engage in your work for the inherent satisfaction of the work, not just for what achievement says about you. You can be in relationships where you're actually curious about the other person, not just managing the relationship to meet your needs. This shift is liberation. Suddenly life gets bigger, more interesting, more meaningful because you're not trapped in the prison of self-preoccupation. And paradoxically, when you stop being so focused on yourself, you often end up feeling better about yourself because you're living in alignment with deeper values, contributing to something beyond your own small world. The fifth and final sign, and perhaps the one that brings it all together, is what Maslow called peak experiences and the capacity for appreciation. In emotional childhood, you're running so fast, achieving so much, seeking so desperately that you can't actually be present to your life. You accomplish something you've worked toward for years, and instead of satisfaction, you feel empty and immediately start seeking the next thing. You're in a beautiful moment with someone you love, and you can't fully feel it because part of you is already worrying about when it will end, whether you deserve it, what you need to do to make it last. You're surrounded by ordinary miracles, the sun on your face, the fact that you're alive, the complexity of existence itself, and you notice none of it because you're too busy comparing yourself to others, planning the future, replaying the past, managing your anxiety. Life is happening, but you're not really in it. Maslow discovered that psychologically mature individuals had developed what he called a capacity for fresh appreciation. They could look at a sunset and experience genuine awe, even though they'd seen thousands of sunsets before. They could be with a loved one and feel profound gratitude for that person's existence, not just taking them for granted as part of the furniture of their life. They could engage in ordinary activities with a sense of presence and aliveness that most people reserve for supposedly special occasions. And they experienced what Maslow termed peak experiences, moments of intense joy, wonder, connection, transcendence that revealed the extraordinary nature of existence itself. These weren't drug-induced or artificially created. They were natural byproducts of being psychologically open, present, and free enough to actually experience reality, without the constant filter of ego defensiveness and need. What keeps you from this capacity in emotional childhood isn't that you're broken or incapable. It's that your psychological energy is consumed by the constant work of managing your inner world. You're so busy protecting yourself, proving yourself, securing validation, managing anxiety, replaying past hurts, and worrying about future threats that you don't have attention available for actually experiencing the present moment. You're living life through a thick fog of psychological noise, and the tragedy is you often don't realize it because it's the only way you've known. You might have glimpses, moments where the fog lifts and you suddenly feel fully alive, fully present, and you think that's special when actually it's simply what it feels like to be human, without all the psychological armor and defensiveness. Maslow argued that peak experiences aren't reserved for spiritual seekers or people who take psychedelics or those lucky few who are just wired differently. They're the natural inheritance of human beings who have done enough psychological work to be present, open, and available to reality as it actually is. The journey from emotional childhood to emotional maturity isn't about reaching some perfect state where you never struggle or hurt or feel vulnerable again. Maslow was very clear about this. The self-actualizing people he studied still had problems, still made mistakes, still experienced pain and loss and difficulty, but they had a fundamentally different relationship with all of it. They weren't running from their experience. They weren't at war with reality. They had developed what he called acceptance, not as resignation, but as a mature acknowledgement that life includes difficulty, that growth involves discomfort, that being human means experiencing the full spectrum of emotion. And from that place of acceptance, they could actually engage with their lives, actually be present to the people they loved, actually contribute to the world in meaningful ways, actually experience moments of transcendent joy and connection. So here's what it comes down to, and I want you to really hear this because this changes everything. You're not stuck in emotional childhood forever. These patterns you've been carrying, these ways of relating to yourself and others in the world, they're not your identity and they're not permanent. They're developmental stages, and like any developmental stage, they can be outgrown. Maslow spent his career documenting that this growth is possible, that human beings have an innate drive toward self-actualization, toward becoming more fully themselves, toward psychological health and maturity. But, and this is crucial, it doesn't happen automatically just because you get older. It requires something from you. It requires willingness to look at your patterns honestly, to feel the feelings you've been avoiding, to challenge the beliefs you've been operating from, to take risks on being more authentic even when it's scary, to develop that inner source of validation instead of constantly seeking it outside yourself. It requires choosing growth over comfort, truth over performance, presence over distraction, and it requires patience with yourself because this is a journey, not a destination. You don't wake up one day fully self-actualized and emotionally mature. You take steps. You have moments of clarity followed by moments of falling back into old patterns. You make progress, then encounter a new layer of healing that needs to happen. And that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Think about where you were when this video started and where you are now. You came here for a reason. Something in you knew it was time to look at these patterns, to understand what's been holding you back, to find language for experiences you've been having but couldn't quite articulate. That impulse, that knowing that it's time to grow, that's not random. That's your innate drive toward self-actualization calling you forward. And every single person who has ever made this journey started exactly where you are now, recognizing patterns, seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time, how emotional childhood has been running their adult life, feeling that mix of discomfort and hope that comes with genuine insight. You're in good company. Some of the most psychologically mature, most fully alive, most genuinely fulfilled people you admire went through this exact process. They weren't born that way. They grew into it, step by step, choice by choice, moment of honesty by moment of honesty. What I want you to understand, and this is coming from years of studying Maslow's work and witnessing countless people make this journey, is that you already have everything you need for this transformation. You don't need to become someone different. You need to become more fully yourself, the self that's been hiding under layers of protection and performance and fear. That authentic self has been there all along, waiting for the moment when you'd be ready to let it emerge. And the beautiful thing, the thing that Maslow saw so clearly in his research, is that as you do this work, as you outgrow emotional childhood and step into emotional maturity, life doesn't just get easier. It gets richer, deeper, more meaningful, more alive. You start having relationships that actually nourish you. You start doing work that actually matters to you. You start experiencing moments of genuine joy and connection and presence that make everything you went through to get here worth it. This isn't just about solving problems or feeling less anxious, though those things happen too. This is about coming home to yourself, to your life, to the fullness of what it means to be human. And that journey, as challenging as it can be, is the most worthwhile thing you'll ever do. If this resonated with you, if you're feeling that pull toward growth, toward understanding yourself more deeply, toward finally outgrowing the patterns that have kept you stuck, then I want to invite you to continue this journey with me. This channel isn't just about psychology theories or interesting ideas. It's about practical, deep, transformative insight into what it actually takes to become more fully yourself, to heal old wounds, to develop the psychological maturity that changes everything about how you experience life. Every week, I share insights from Maslow's work and others who studied human potential, not just as abstract concepts, but as lived experience, as practical guidance for your own growth. The people who have joined this community talk about it as finding their people, finally being in a space where depth matters, where real talk about the psychological journey is valued, where you're not alone in wanting more from life than just getting by. So if that speaks to you, click that subscribe button right now. Join us. Let this be one small step in your journey from emotional childhood to emotional maturity. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next insight that might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the right moment. You've already taken the first step by being here, by watching this far, by being willing to look honestly at yourself. That takes courage. Now keep going. And speaking of going deeper, next week I'm covering something that I think will be incredibly valuable for where you are right now. We're exploring Maslow's concept of the deficiency needs versus growth needs, understanding exactly what psychological needs have to be met before you can truly step into self-actualization, and why so many people stay stuck trying to self-actualize while their basic psychological needs are still unmet. It's going to give you a clear map of where you are in your development and what specific work needs to happen next. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Notice your patterns without judgment. Take small risks on being more authentic. And remember, emotional childhood isn't a life sentence, it's a starting point. And you're already on your way to something so much better.